Stop resisting!
Oh my God, look at that!
The swearing-in ceremony proceeded as scheduled, but everything had changed. Maya stood in Judge Thornton's chambers, right hand raised, left hand on a Bible that her grandmother had carried from Mississippi during the Great Migration. The emerald suit fit perfectly. Mrs. Chen had rushed it over personally, refusing to let the morning's events derail this historic moment. But as Maya recited the oath, "I do solemnly swear that I will support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this Commonwealth," she felt the weight of those handcuffs still pressing against her wrists. The room was packed with officials, family members, colleagues, and media. Everyone knew what had happened. The footage had already gone viral. Justice for Maya trending nationally within an hour. The video of her in handcuffs, speaking with calm authority while detained, had been viewed millions of times. When she finished the oath, the applause was thunderous, but it felt different now. Not just celebration, but solidarity. Witness. "Thank you," Maya began her first speech as district attorney, her voice steady. "3 hours ago, I experienced firsthand what thousands of Philadelphians experience every day, the presumption of guilt based solely on the color of my skin." The room went silent. "I was handcuffed on a public sidewalk. I was assumed to be a criminal by a woman who had never met me, but was certain she knew what I was capable of. And law enforcement responded without evidence, without due process, without the basic respect that should be afforded to every citizen. Not because I'm about to become DA, but because I'm a human being." She paused, letting the words settle. "Some people might say I should be angry. I am. Some might say I should be hurt. I am. But more than anything, I am resolved to use this position to ensure that what happened to me this morning becomes impossible in this city." Bernard Hayes stood in the front row, pride and pain mixed on his weathered face. "This office will immediately launch a comprehensive review of police practices, particularly regarding stops, detainments, and arrests that lack probable cause. We will establish a civil rights division specifically focused on cases of racial profiling. And we will create community oversight that actually has teeth." Maya looked directly at the cameras. "To every person who has ever been stopped, questioned, detained, or arrested because someone else decided you looked suspicious, I see you. To every parent who has had to teach their children how to survive a police encounter rather than trust it, I see you. To every individual who has been made to feel like a criminal in their own neighborhood, I see you. And to those who believe they can weaponize law enforcement against people they deem unworthy or threatening simply by pointing a finger, your free pass ends today." The applause erupted again, longer this time. Officer Cortland and Officer Jensen were placed on administrative leave pending investigation, not as punishment, Maya later clarified in a press conference, but as a necessary step in a thorough review. They would receive additional training on implicit bias, probable cause, and de-escalation. Their personnel files would be examined for patterns. Vanessa Hartwell faced misdemeanor charges for filing a false police report and was named in a civil suit that would ultimately settle for an undisclosed sum, donated entirely to organizations supporting criminal justice reform. But the real change was quieter, slower. Within 6 months, Maya's office had prosecuted 14 cases of racial profiling, established monthly community forums where citizens could report concerns directly to the DA, and created a rapid response team for investigating questionable police interactions. The security footage from Mrs. Chen's store had led to the actual vandal, a 19-year-old white woman from the suburbs who'd been caught tagging several cars as part of a TikTok challenge. She'd received community service and restitution requirements. No handcuffs, no viral video, no trauma. Maya kept the photo from that morning on her desk. Not the professional portrait from the swearing-in, but a screenshot from someone's phone showing her in handcuffs, chin up, eyes forward. A reminder of what she was fighting for. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to admit. Maya Richardson was lucky. She had credentials that demanded verification. She had a mentor who arrived at the critical moment. She had the vocabulary and knowledge to assert her rights without escalating the situation into violence. But what about the people who don't? What about the everyday Philadelphians who experience this same humiliation, this same assumption of guilt, but without cameras rolling, without witnesses, without anyone important to vouch for their humanity? They're why Maya went to law school. They're why she spent 12 years prosecuting violent criminals. And they're why she'll spend every day as district attorney fighting to ensure that justice is blind, truly blind, not just to everything except race.
Her name was Judge Ayana Mitchell, though on that particular morning, she was just another face in the crowd. At 38 years old, she'd already made history as one of the youngest black women ever appointed to the federal bench in the Northern District. But that morning, dressed in jeans and a simple blazer, with her natural hair pulled into a low bun and minimal makeup, she looked like any other young professional heading to work. Ayana had always been deliberate about her appearance outside the courtroom. She refused to wear her judicial robes anywhere but behind the bench. "I'm a person first," she'd tell her clerks. "The robe doesn't make me. It represents what I've earned." That Wednesday started like any other. She'd grabbed coffee from her favorite corner cafe, the one where the owner, Mr. Davis, always remembered her order: medium oat milk latte, extra foam, no sugar. They'd chatted briefly about his grandson's college acceptance letter. She smiled genuinely, offered congratulations, and left a generous tip before heading toward the courthouse 6 blocks away. The federal building was an imposing structure, all concrete, glass, and authority. Ayana had walked through those doors hundreds of times, but today she'd arrived earlier than usual. Her bailiff, Marcus, had called in sick, and she wanted to review case files before the morning docket began. The building was quieter at 7:30 a.m., with only security personnel and a few early bird attorneys milling about. She approached the public entrance instead of the judicial entrance. Her key card was in her chambers, and she figured it would be faster to just go through the standard metal detectors. She'd done it before, without issue. But today, officers Ryan Kowalski and Derek Palmer were stationed at the entrance. Both were relatively new transfers from the city police department, brought in to supplement courthouse security during a staffing shortage. They'd only been there 2 weeks, and their orientation had been rushed. More importantly, they'd never seen Judge Mitchell out of her robes. Ayana placed her bag on the conveyor belt and stepped through the metal detector. No beep. Clean. She reached for her bag on the other side. "Hold on," Officer Kowalski said, his hand shooting out to block her. "I need to search that." "It just went through the scanner," Ayana replied calmly, though her internal radar was already pinging. She'd learned years ago to recognize that particular tone, the one that said, "I've already decided something about you." "Random check," Palmer added, stepping closer. Too close, invading her personal space in a way that had nothing to do with security protocol. Ayana took a breath. "Gentlemen, I work here. I'm running late for—" "Everyone works here, sweetheart," Kowalski interrupted, unzipping her bag roughly. "That doesn't mean you get to skip security." Sweetheart. The word landed like a slap. She was a federal judge, but in this moment she was being reduced to a term of condescension typically reserved for children or waitresses. "I'm not trying to skip anything," Ayana said, her voice steady but firm. "I went through the detector. It didn't beep. My bag went through the X-ray. What exactly is the issue? Palmer pulled out her laptop, her files, her personal items, tossing them onto the metal table with unnecessary force. The issue is your attitude. A small crowd was beginning to form. Early arriving lawyers, courthouse staff, a few members of the public with morning hearings. Phones were already appearing, that instinctive modern response to confrontation. Record everything, just in case. I'm not having an attitude, Ayana said, quietly. I have somewhere to be. I've complied with every "you're arguing with officers," Kowalski cut in. That's suspicious behavior. And there it was, the word that transforms ordinary actions into criminal suspicion when performed by black bodies. Walking is suspicious. Shopping is suspicious. Breathing while black is suspicious. Ayana felt the familiar tightness in her chest, that horrible combination of rage and restraint that every black professional knows intimately. She could pull rank right now, flash her judicial ID, watch their faces drain of color. But something made her hesitate. Maybe it was curiosity about how far they would take this. Maybe it was exhaustion at having to prove her humanity over and over again. I'm not arguing, she said, each word measured. I'm asking a question which I believe I have the right to do. Palmer's jaw tightened. Kowalski's hand moved to his radio. And in that moment, Ayana realized something terrible. These men weren't going to back down. They'd committed to a narrative. Young black woman, attitude problem, potential threat. And their egos wouldn't let them retreat. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside for additional screening. On what grounds? On the grounds that I said so.
The situation deteriorated with breathtaking speed. When Ayana didn't immediately move aside, Kowalski reached for her arm. She instinctively pulled back, not aggressively, just a reflexive response to unwanted touching. But that movement was all they needed. "She's resisting!" Palmer shouted, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "I'm not resisting anything," Ayana's voice rose, finally cracking with genuine alarm. "Get your hands off me!" But Kowalski already had her wrist, twisting it behind her back in a pain compliance hold that made her gasp. Palmer grabbed her other arm. And suddenly, shockingly, Ayana Mitchell, federal judge, Harvard Law graduate, woman who dedicated her life to justice, was being forced to the ground in the courthouse lobby. "Stop! You're hurting me!" She wasn't screaming yet, but her voice carried pain and disbelief in equal measure. "Stop resisting!" Kowalski yelled back, even though she wasn't, even though she was merely trying to keep her face from hitting the marble floor. The phones were everywhere now, dozens of them, recording from every angle. An attorney Ayana recognized from previous cases was filming, his face slack with horror. A court reporter was shouting, "She's a judge! That's Judge Mitchell!" But her words were lost in the chaos. Palmer's knee pressed into Ayana's back. Her blazer tore. Her carefully pinned hair came loose. Her bag's contents scattered across the floor. Lip gloss, case files marked confidential. Her judicial ID rolling away under the metal detector. "Check her ID," someone in the crowd yelled. "Just check her ID." But the officers weren't listening. They were locked into their narrative now. Two men who'd escalated a situation beyond the point of easy retreat. Admitting error now would mean admitting they'd assaulted someone for no reason. So they doubled down. "We have reason to believe she's trespassing," Palmer announced to no one in particular. "Trespassing?" Ayana's voice finally broke into something raw. "I work here. I'm a federal judge." "Sure you are," Kowalski muttered, and there was such casual contempt in those three words that they cut deeper than the physical restraints. This was the moment that would haunt Ayana for months afterward. Not the pain in her wrists or the humiliation of being held down, but the absolute certainty in that officer's voice that she couldn't possibly be who she claimed to be. That a young black woman in jeans simply didn't compute as federal judge in his worldview. You can't do this," she said, and she hated how her voice shook. "This is illegal. This is assault." "What's illegal is interfering with officers performing their duties," Palmer shot back. They hauled her to her feet. each officer gripping an arm and a leg as if she were a dangerous criminal being transported. Ayana's body went rigid, not from resistance, but from the sheer shock of degradation. They were carrying her, actually carrying her, like a piece of furniture through the courthouse lobby while dozens of people were watching and recording. "Let me go!" she was screaming now, no longer able to maintain composure. "You have no right! Let me go!" Her shoe fell off. Someone in the crowd gasped. An elderly black security guard Ayana had known for years stood frozen, his hand halfway to his radio, his face crumpling with impotent rage. He knew who she was, but he was also a black man in uniform, and moving to help her might mean becoming the next target. "Call Chief Judge Morrison! Someone call the Chief Judge's chambers!" But Palmer and Kowalski had already reached the building exit. They were taking her outside, actually removing her from the courthouse. The morning sunlight hit Ayana's face like a spotlight on shame, illuminating her torn clothing, her loose hair, her missing shoe, her tear-streaked face. A news van was parked across the street. Pure coincidence. They'd been covering an unrelated case, but the cameraman's instincts kicked in immediately. He swung his camera around and started filming. Within 90 seconds, the image would be uploaded. Within 5 minutes, it would be on social media, and within an hour, it would be national news. "Where are you taking me?" Ayana demanded, her voice hoarse from shouting. "You're being detained for trespassing, resisting security screening, and assaulting an officer," Palmer recited, as if reading from a script he'd memorized years ago. "I didn't assault anyone. I didn't resist. I went through your scanner. She stopped, swallowed hard, tried a different approach. "My judicial ID fell out of my bag. It's on the floor by the metal detector. Just look at it. Please, just look at it." "We'll sort everything out at the station," Kowalski said. The station! They were actually going to arrest her. They were going to put her in a police car and book her like a criminal. A federal judge was about to be processed through the justice system like any other suspect, all because she'd had the audacity to walk through a public entrance while black. A courthouse employee ran outside, breathless. It was Jennifer Huang, one of Ayana's law clerks. "Officer, stop! That's Judge Mitchell! That's my boss!" "Step back, ma'am," Palmer warned. "She's a federal judge. Her courtroom has hearings starting in," she checked her phone, "45 minutes. You're making a mistake." "We'll let our supervisors determine that," Kowalski replied. They were at the police vehicle now. Palmer reached for the back door, and Ayana realized with a wave of nausea that they were actually going to put her in the cage. The metal divider? The plastic seats designed to be hosed down? The place that she had sentenced genuine criminals after sentencing them from her bench? "I need my phone," she said suddenly. "I have a right to make a call." "You'll get your call at the station," Palmer said. "No." The word came out like a gunshot. "I know my rights better than you do. I have a right to make a call now. My phone is in my bag, which is still on your conveyor belt. Get it now." Something in her voice, some authority that transcended her current position on the concrete with officers looming over her, made Kowalski hesitate. He exchanged a glance with Palmer. "Get her phone," Palmer finally said. Kowalski walked back inside. Jennifer followed, calling over her shoulder, "I'm calling the chief judge. Don't move her." The crowd had spilled outside now, at least 30 people circling at a cautious distance, all filming, all witnessing. Ayana saw their faces: shock, outrage, fear, and on a few white faces, something that looked almost like relief that it wasn't happening to them. A young black man, maybe 19, caught her eye. He was crying. Not sobbing, just silent tears streaming down his face while he was holding up his phone to record. And Ayana understood. He was seeing his own future in her present. If a federal judge could be treated like this, what chance did he have? Kowalski returned with her phone. She grabbed it with shaking hands and pulled up her contacts. Her finger hovered over Chief Judge Morrison's number, then moved to her attorney friend Marcus Reeves, and finally landed on her mother. No, not her mother. Not yet. Her mother's heart couldn't take seeing this. She dialed her bailiff instead. Marcus, who had called in sick, answered on the second ring, his voice thick with congestion. "Marcus, I need you to cancel my morning docket. Tell everyone I'm—" She couldn't say it. Couldn't say, "I've been arrested." "Tell them there's been an emergency. And call Chief Judge Morrison. Tell him to check the news." Judge Mitchell, what's wrong? What happened? Just do it, please. She hung up, looked up at Palmer and Kowalski, who were watching her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Uncertainty? Worry? It was too late for either. I will go with you, Ayana said quietly, but I'm telling you right now, you've just made the worst mistake of your careers.
They put her in the car. That's what would echo in the news coverage for days afterward. Not just that they'd restrained her or questioned her, but that they'd actually placed Judge Ayana Mitchell in the back of a police vehicle, behind the metal divider like a common criminal. The ride to the station took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of Ayana sitting in forced silence, her hands still zip-tied behind her back, watching the city roll past through windows she couldn't open. She focused on breathing, on not crying anymore, on preserving some fragment of dignity when she was being deliberately stripped of it. Palmer drove. Kowalski sat in the passenger seat, and she could see him texting, his thumbs moving rapidly across his phone, probably reporting to his supervisor, probably realizing, slowly, terribly, that something had gone very wrong. Her phone buzzed in Kowalski's pocket. Her mother, probably, or Marcus with an update. She'd never know because they'd taken it from her after that one call. The police station's garage smelled like oil and old coffee. They parked in a bay reserved for prisoner transport. The word made Ayana's stomach turn. Prisoner. She was a prisoner. But then everything stopped. Palmer's radio crackled. Unit 47, hold your position. Do not exit the vehicle. Repeat, do not exit the vehicle. A pause. Then, supervisor en route. Do not move. Kowalski turned to look at Palmer, his face draining of color. In the back seat, Ayana felt something shift, the first crack in their certainty. What's happening? She asked. Neither officer answered. 30 seconds later, a woman in a captain's uniform appeared at the driver's window, her face rigid with barely controlled fury. She yanked open Palmer's door. Both of you, out, now! They scrambled out like cadets caught in violation. The captain walked to the back door, opened it, and looked at Ayana with an expression that contained apology, horror, and rage in equal measure. Judge Mitchell, she said quietly, I'm Captain Sandra Torres. I am so sorry. She produced a pocket knife and carefully cut the zip ties from Ayana's wrists. The plastic had left deep red marks in her brown skin. Can you stand? Ayana nodded, not trusting her voice yet. She stepped out of the vehicle on shaking legs, noticed her bare foot, remembered her shoe falling off in the courthouse lobby. That detail, the missing shoe, suddenly felt like the most absurd part of this entire nightmare. We've sent officers to retrieve your belongings from the courthouse, your phone, your bag, and she swallowed, your shoe. Behind her, Palmer and Kowalski stood at attention, their faces ashen. Did you know? Ayana asked them directly. Do you know now who I am? Ma'am, Judge Mitchell, Palmer couldn't finish. We didn't know, Kowalski whispered. You didn't ask, Ayana cut him off, her voice steady now, judicial. I told you I worked at the courthouse. I told you I was a federal judge. Multiple people told you. My ID was on the floor. And you didn't ask because you'd already decided what you saw. A young black woman who couldn't possibly belong in that building with any real authority. The silence that followed was absolute. For what it's worth, Palmer said finally, we're sorry. Sorry? Ayana repeated the word like it was foreign. You dragged me across a courthouse floor. You carried me out of the building where I dispense justice every single day. You put me in a cage, and you're sorry? Captain Torres intervened. Judge Mitchell, I've contacted Chief Judge Morrison. He's requested that you be transported back to the courthouse immediately if you're willing. If you'd prefer to go home,
or to a hospital to be checked. "I have a courtroom full of cases waiting for me," Ayana said. "Take me back." The ride back was in Captain Torres's personal vehicle. Ayana sat in the front seat this time, staring straight ahead, barely registering the captain's continued apologies. When they pulled up to the courthouse, the scene had transformed into chaos. News vans lined the street. Chief Judge Morrison stood on the steps with courthouse security and what looked like half the federal bench. Protesters had already begun gathering, some with signs reading, "Justice for Judge Mitchell," and others with the more pointed, "Who's watching the watchman?" Jennifer ran down the steps with Ayana's bag, her face streaked with tears. "We rescheduled everything. Your morning docket has been moved to this afternoon. Everyone's been notified. Judge, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't—" "It's not your fault," Ayana said softly, taking her bag. Inside was her judicial ID, her phone with 147 missed messages, and her shoe. Chief Judge Morrison approached, his elderly face creased with concern and fury. "Ayana, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "I need my courtroom," I replied. "You don't have to. I need my courtroom," I repeated, this time firmer. He studied her face, then nodded. "Then let's get you your courtroom."
Ayana Mitchell walked back into the federal courthouse at 9:47 a.m., 1 hour and 17 minutes after being dragged out of it. She went directly to her chambers, where her clerks had assembled emergency supplies: a fresh blouse, a first aid kit, water, and tissues. She changed clothes, washed her face, reapplied her makeup, and repinned her hair with hands that still shook slightly. Then she put on her robe. The transformation wasn't just physical. The moment that black robe settled onto her shoulders, something shifted back into place. She wasn't the woman who'd been humiliated in a courthouse lobby. She was Judge Mitchell, presiding officer of this court, keeper of justice in this room. At 11:30 a.m., she entered her courtroom. The gallery was packed, far more crowded than a typical morning docket would justify. Word had spread. The video had gone viral. Everyone wanted to see what she would do. "All rise," her bailiff called out. "The Honorable Judge Ayana Mitchell presiding." The room stood as one. Ayana took her seat behind the bench, arranged her papers, and looked out at the assembled crowd. She saw attorneys she'd worked with for years, their faces full of concern and solidarity. She saw members of the public, including the young black man who'd been crying outside, now sitting in the front row with red-rimmed eyes. And in the very back, accompanied by their union attorney, and looking like they wanted to disappear through the floor, stood officers Ryan Kowalski and Derek Palmer. Their case, the one they'd been scheduled to testify in that morning, was a civil rights lawsuit against the city's police department. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood. Ayana let the silence build for a moment. Then she spoke. "This court is now in session. Before we begin today's proceedings, I want to address what happened this morning." Every phone in the gallery was recording. She knew that. She'd known that when she decided to speak. At approximately 7:40 a.m., I was physically restrained, dragged across this courthouse's lobby, and detained by security officers who didn't believe I could possibly be a federal judge. This happened despite my repeated statements of who I was, despite multiple witnesses identifying me, and despite my credentials being visible on the floor where they had fallen from my bag during the initial confrontation. She paused. Let that sink in. "I want to be clear about something. What happened to me this morning was wrong. It was humiliating. It was traumatic. But I am not unique. What happened to me happens to Black Americans every single day in every corner of this country. The only difference is that I had a courtroom to walk back into, I had authority that eventually, finally, made people listen. Most people don't have that. Her voice remained steady, judicial, but there was steel underneath. The young black man in the grocery store accused of stealing the groceries he'd just purchased. The black woman in the parking lot questioned about whether she really owns that nice car. The black teenager walking through a neighborhood where someone decides he doesn't belong. They don't have robes that magically transform them into people worthy of respect in other people's eyes. They just have their dignity. And so often, that dignity is stripped away in these moments of assumed criminality. She looked directly at Kowalski and Palmer. To the officers who detained me, you will face consequences for your actions. Those consequences will be determined by your department and possibly by civil litigation. But I want you to understand something. Your mistake wasn't just about me. Your mistake was a symptom of a deeper disease. The assumption that black bodies are inherently suspicious, inherently criminal, inherently less deserving of basic respect and due process. Until we cure that disease, incidents like this morning will continue to happen, and people will continue to be harmed. The courtroom was utterly silent. I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but for change. Every person in this room, every person watching this video that I know is being recorded, needs to ask themselves, how many times have I made assumptions about someone based on how they look? How many times have I seen a person of color and felt fear or suspicion without cause? How many times have I been complicit in a system that treats black Americans as guilty until proven innocent? Ayana gathered her papers, signaling the end of her statement. This court will continue its work today, because justice doesn't stop for one judge's trauma. But I challenge everyone here to think about what justice really means. Does it mean equality before the law? Or does it mean equality before we ever reach the law, in grocery stores, on streets, in courthouse lobbies? The answer to that question will determine what kind of country we leave for the young man sitting in my front row, filming this on his phone, crying earlier because he saw himself in my humiliation. We can do better. We must do better. Now, let's proceed with today's docket. The video of Ayana's statement would be viewed over 40 million times in the first 72 hours. Officers Kowalski and Palmer were suspended pending investigation and would eventually be terminated. Captain Torres implemented mandatory implicit bias training for all courthouse security, training that Ayana herself would help design. But perhaps the most significant change was quieter, more personal. In courtrooms across the country, judges began sharing their own stories of racial profiling. Attorneys spoke up about being mistaken for custodial staff in their own firms. The conversation that Ayana sparked didn't solve centuries of systemic racism, but it forced countless Americans to confront their own biases. 3 months after the incident, the young black man from the gallery, his name was David Chen, a pre-law student, would submit his application to federal judicial clerkships. In his personal statement, he would write about watching Judge Mitchell walk back into her courtroom with her head high, and deciding that day that the legal system needed more people willing to fight for justice even after injustice had been done to them. Judge Ayana Mitchell would continue to serve on the federal bench for decades. Each case she presided over informed by the knowledge of what it feels like to be denied basic dignity. She never forgot that morning, the marble floor, the zip ties, the missing shoe. But she also never forgot what came after, the power of truth spoken clearly, the possibility of change, and the responsibility of those with authority to use it for those who have none.